Hello, my name is Dante Renee, and welcome to the 10 Room Bizarro YouTube page where I talk about films that I believe need to be talked about more. Like tonight's film, 1972's Young Playthings. And this is filmed entirely in Sweden, and this is directed and produced by Joe Sarno. And it is starring Christina Lindberg. This is Young Playthings 1972. And you get just a picture there of Christina Lindberg on the back. And this is put out by Club Super 8 Video. I purchased this on diabolicdvd.com. This is an extremely rare Swedish distribution company. And for an extremely rare Swedish film, from Joe Sarno during his time in Sweden, directing in Sweden. And I would say a lot of people don't even know Christina Lindberg is in this film in a very major role in the film. So this is 1972's Young Playthings. First and foremost, the movie starts off and well, we have the actors speaking in English here. So it's a Swedish production, Swedish actors and actresses, but people are speaking in English. And there is a foreword at the beginning of this film that basically the film elements, this is the best. I mean, they're extremely rare. They could barely find them. They found them in Joe Sarno's basement, and they cut it together, and the pieces they couldn't find, they used from a VHS copy, and that basically what you're holding in your hands here from Club Super 8 distribution is the only copy, the best you'll ever see it, and this is it. I mean, this is how rare this movie is. It's extremely rare. This is the only way to see it, supposedly, and it was pretty much lost until this release came out here. So this is a pretty major deal. Now, that said, between the VHS and the regular, it looks good, but the sound I found in the VHS portions was better than the sound in the 16mm work print, which is the majority of the film. And unfortunately, the sound a lot of the time was very difficult for me to hear, predominantly in certain sequences, certain theatrical sequences that I'll explain about a little bit later here. So this is Young Playthings, 1972. It did not detract from the experience. It actually enhanced the experience in some form or fashion, with not being able to make out certain lines of dialogue and such. So let's get into the film here. Let's do it. This is essentially, this is probably one of the most unique sexploitation erotic films I've ever seen. It is sexploitation type of deal, erotic, meets surreal, meets otherworldly nightmare, meets the bizarre, the weird, the psychosexual. Something internal, something mental, something emotional, something otherworldly. I heard somebody say it almost felt like a Kenneth Anger film at times. We have two girls that are friends, and the one girl is married to a guy, and there is somewhat of a love triangle there, and things happening with romance and just issues of love within those three. And then we have the meeting of a neighbor in an apartment building who lives downstairs, who collects and repairs and sells antique toys, and also does a bit of theater in her apartment that she never leaves. And there is much mystery to be had, much darkness to be had. When we go into this film, when I look at the music, the score for this film, a lot of this film is silent, meaning just dialogue, just natural sounds, lots of birds chirping outside loudly, but when there is music, it's very piano driven. It almost sounds like there's a frolicky sense to it. It almost sounds like it's part of a music box, part of a carnival, part of something unnerving yet something innocent at the same time. Um, and we have some percussive elements, some very strong percussive elements to the score of this film as well, where there's just percussion. Um, and some rhythms with the piano and sections like that, sounding a bit theatrical, some noises, things like that. But I will say that it is a minimal sound design, and there is much silence because there is dialogue that actually forms the sound design for this film. Stylistically, um, very beautifully shot. I mean, I know the source material here was rough, but very beautifully shot. Beautiful landscapes outside in the woods, forest, body of water, and then very theatrical shots of the theater happening inside of the mysterious apartment. Um, and we have, some very sultry, erotic shots as well, very sexual shots in here as well that are done very well, very erotically, very interestingly. Um, and the editing for the film is very interesting as well, where it cuts itself around, it moves around in a rhythm, in a pattern that is very interesting and very artistically done. The edits seem like they're cut in jagged points, and then like as if they're timeless, as if they're working on another sense of time. Maybe you're going back to something that happened, or we move quickly to something else, and the editing is very unique and very artistic. Um, this is a very unique, and like I said, I've never seen an erotic film like this before, and I hear that it's nothing like anything else Joe Sarno has done, and this is something that is truly in its own world. Um, we have full frontal nudity from women, but it's mostly topless in this film. Mostly topless from Christina Lindbergh, this brunette woman, and but we do have full nudity as well from the women in the film. Um, Lots of it, lots of topless nudity predominantly, but we have what seems to be implied sex scenes that are very hot, very heavy, very explicit in tone, and they're very interesting as well because of the context of the love triangle between these three, the two girlfriends and the one girl's husband. I don't want to divulge too much, but the unfolding of what is happening from the beginning of the film to midway into the film, it's very captivating. And we have some very explicit sexual situations in here, again, that are implied, but explicit at the same time, involving dildos and vibrators and things like that, done very within art, within theater, within nightmare, within the surreal, and possibly supernatural or otherworldly. There are some profoundly innocent things in this film amidst the relationships, and some profoundly, disturbingly dark, weird situations unfolding in this film. This is as we go to the theater of this mysterious woman's apartment and the story of her own family, the mystery of that. We almost are getting an anthology of stories in this film in her theatrical productions involving makeup and moons and horses and dildos and sex and orgies and different people and their stories. Very, very interesting and weird. I will say that this is probably my favorite Christina Lindbergh performance, and I've seen most of her films, and this is probably my favorite performance of hers. Her emotion, her eyes, her nonverbals and her verbals, and she's speaking in English here. It is just, it was just dumbfounding how amazing she was in this film. I mean, I've always thought she was amazing, but in this film, she just far surpassed all the other films that I've seen. I mean, just really, there was something very special happening here with her, and she occupies a lead role here as well. This there is confusion to be had, there is the bizarre, and there is the haunting of something that you don't understand. There is some very weird things that unfold in the last like 10 minutes of this film, almost, let's say 15 minutes of the film, involving a knife. And it was so wildly surreal and interesting, and questions are popping up in your head as you're watching, and you're not getting answers, yet you're wondering if you do have the answer, and maybe you're just not getting at it yet. I mean, some very wild things are happening in the last 15 minutes of the film. I mean, the entire film unfolds in a very interesting way, but things really collide and get even crazier as the film ends, and the ending itself is so abruptly surreal and leaving you in the darkness. Now, I was having a problem with the dialogue in the English version. Predominantly the theatrical tape reels that when you watch the film, there's these tape reels that play over the theater, and they act those things out. And so I decided to put the subtitles on. The subtitles were Swedish, and there was a line that was being repeated over and over and over again in the last minute of the film. And so I paused it and then translated it on Google, and it was haunting. It was haunting when I couldn't understand what the tape reel was saying in English, but when I translated it from the Swedish subtitle, that was the end of the movie, and that was very dark and haunting. And when you see what's happening in the theater, the theatrical productions of the apartment complex, and when you're connecting that with the very complicated and interesting, almost free love but complex love triangle of the two girls and the one guy, and what is the interaction here between that and the theatrical productions, there's some very, very interesting things going on here. I've never seen anything like Young Playthings before. I will say that right off the bat. Look at this amazing art on the front here. Truly surreal, truly unreal. This is 1972, Joe Sarno's Young Playthings. The tagline, "They're the erotic toys of the mindless generation, trapped in a never land of distorted sexual practices." There's only a few copies left on diabolicdvd.com. This was about $29, something like that. Amazing, amazing, amazing. Thank you so much for watching the 10 Room Bizarre YouTube page, where I talk about films that I believe need to be talked about more, like Young Playthings from 1972. Thank you so much, and have a great night.